somebody, or how do you prove that witchcraft happened? Because this is the supernatural. There should probably be no laws on witchcraft, but strengthen criminal laws where the sentencing and the aggravating circumstances can make the punishment more severe. But there needs to be a guide on this to show people that, one, this is an issue of criminal law, and two, if you do witchcraft, it's not a separate issue from criminal law. This is not clear to our people on this continent. Witchcraft is seen as a communal belief, something separate from criminal law. And even though it might be obvious to you, given your higher education, I think this needs to be stated somewhere in the future by you, who have the authority to do this. It will really go a long way, even in helping my work when I go to countries who keep asking me, what do we do about this type of situation? Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam. I would like to see the entire report, and it's hereby adopted. Mr. Clerk, please, you have the floor for the 6th item on the agenda of our deliberations this afternoon. It's the presentation of the workshop on the Permanent Commission of Trade and the African Free Trade Zone and the protocol on the free movement of goods and persons and the African passport, as signed during the extraordinary summit of the African Union in Kigali, Rwanda. I'd like to invite the president of the Trade Committee on Customs to come and make his presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, during the 6th ordinary section of the 4th Parliament of the Pan-African Parliament, the Permanent Committee on Trade, Customs and Immigration Matters had a half-day workshop on the final African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and the Protocol on Free Movement of People, and the African passport assigned at the extraordinary section in Kigali on 21st March 2018. The workshop was held on 8th March at the Pan-African Parliament precinct in Midrand, South Africa. The objective of the workshop was to create awareness and strengthen the capacity of members of the Pan-African Parliament on the provisions and various benefits of the CFTA and free movement of people, especially in the socio-economic development of Africa. The members of the following two committees, the Permanent Committee on Trade, Customs and Immigration, and the Committee on Transport, Industry, Communication, Energy, Science, and Technology. The presentation was made by His Excellency, Mr. Albert Machanga, AU Commissioner for Trade and Industries, and Her Excellency, Mr. Samantha Sisioma, African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs, on the two topics. Honorable Albert Machanda, AU Commissioner for Trade and Industry, made a presentation on the Africa Final Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and the role of Pan-African Parliament in promoting the ratification and domestication of the agreement. The Commission indicated that the African Free Trade Agreement is one of the flagship programs under the first 10 years implementation plan of the African Union Agenda 2063. The AFCFTA that is desired for the continent is a people-centered developmental FTA that goes beyond tariff liberalization, but which increases choices and variables of African people. The AFTA that will help to address many of Africa's most significant challenges, including youth empowerment, migration, skill development, women empowerment, industrialization, and infrastructure development. One of the mic is off. An FTA that will help to address many of Africa's most significant challenges. I've done that, sorry. And the FTA that will help Africa to strengthen its trade and investment relations, thereby unleashing its business potential, including its service sector. An FTA that will help Africa integrate in the global value chains and strengthen Africa's global position vis-à-vis the rest of the world. Since the launch of the FTA, negotiation processes in June 2015 by the AU heads of state and government, there has been considerable progress, both on the institutional and technical dimension. A minimum of 32 ratifications are required for entry into force of the agreement. Currently, 3 member states, namely Kenya, Rwanda, and Ghana, have ratified the agreement establishing the AFCFTA. The Commissioner emphasized that despite the numerous achievements made since the launch and the signature of the AFCFTA negotiation process, there have been some challenges. So far, as of today, 46 countries have signed, and challenges have been identified. Some of these challenges are varying levels of development and priorities of countries, institutions, organization capacities of countries, sensitive issues such as level of ambition, service regulations, etc. The role of Pan-African Parliament in this dynamic, historic, and transformative projects are outlined as follows. As legislators in their respective countries, parliamentarians are expected to ensure timely ratification of AFCFTA legal instruments once the executive branch or branches avail them to their national parliaments. As elected representatives in their various or respective constituency, parliamentarians are also expected to encourage the African private sector in their countries to invest and trade in the CFTA in order to generate jobs, decent standards of living for their electors or electorates, and as members of the oversight institution over the executive branch of their respective governments, members of parliaments are expected to demand from their respective executive branches regular updates on their respective countries' actions and progress vis-à-vis the AFCFTA. The second presentation on the protocol to the treaty establishing the African economy communities, relating to the free movement of persons, rights of residence, and rights of establishment, and the role of the Pan-African Parliament in promoting the ratification and domestication of the protocol was made by the AU Commissioner on Political Affairs. Excuse for my poor quality of voicing. AU Commission for Political Affairs indicated that African Union vision based on Agenda 2063 aspirations is to have an integrated, prosperous, peaceful Africa led by its own citizens and presenting a dynamic force on the international arena. This vision is divided into 12 flagship projects, including Continental Free Trade Area and the free movement of persons and the African passport. These 2 flagship projects were signed by 44 countries. Right now, as of today, information available to us, 46 have signed. 46 head of states have signed. And these were signed in Kigali on May 21, 2018. The protocol to the treaty establishing an African economic community relating to the free movement of people and persons, rights of residence, establishing rights of establishment as 7 parts. The objectives of the protocol is to facilitate implementation of the treaty establishing the African Economic Community by providing for the progressive implementation of free movement of persons and the rights of residence and rights to establishment in Africa, meaning any part of Africa. The AU Commission underscores that to facilitate the cross-border travel of people, the heads of states and governments of the African Union at the 27th summit here in July 2016 in Kigali, Rwanda, launched the African passport. This launch reflects the desire and commitment of African leaders to ensure that African people have the ability to move freely, to visit, to trade, to study, to work, to reside, or to establish themselves anywhere in the 55 states of Africa by respecting the laws of the host country. The Commission suggested few areas of consideration by the Pan-African Parliament going forward. The Pan-African Parliament members are in the privileged position of seeing all matters from a global, continental, regional, and national perspective, as well as having an ability to act and influence at national level for the fast forwarding of all matters related to the protocol. This entails initially the signature, ratification, and domestication of the protocol by member states. Where necessary, the AU is available to accompany members of the Parliament, of the Pan-African Parliament Committees on Trade and Immigration Matters, including the support at national level for the ratification and domestication processes to take place. 2, the PAP members have a unique role pertaining to the harmonization of laws, policies, and structures in order to facilitate implementation of the protocol. The third, it is further enhanced by the role attributed to member states on the same in Article 26, pertaining to the coordination and harmonization of the protocol on free movement, giving room to the AUC's role in Article 29 of the same protocol that seeks to ensure that there exist follow-up mechanisms. The PAP members within their relevant committees of their various houses of parliament at the national levels can ensure that budgets are voted, have taken into consideration these works, as well as integrating the free movement agenda into national development plans, structures, and systems. And during the discussion, it was observed that the transport sector, which is necessary for Africa trade, is neglected. There is a need for Africa to invest in the transport sector as it will facilitate intra-African trade. There is also need to engage media in the various African regions to explain to the people of Africa the benefits of the Continental Free Trade Area or the agreement of RECs, the regional economic communities, and the regional in a region economic community to involve them. We are involved in the process from the beginning. At the beginning of the discussions, the following at the end of the discussions, the following recommendations were made. 1, the Pan-African Parliament should organize a continental conference, with national parliaments, portfolio committees on trade, finance, and transport on the African Final Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, and the protocol to the treaty establishing the African Economic Community relating to the free movement of persons, rights of residence, and rights of establishment. The conference will be a platform for national parliament to be aware of the benefits of the treaties and to engage them for the promotion of the signature, ratification, and domestication of the two treaties. Second, the members states should focus on the implementation of the continental integration through the free trade or free movement of people, goods, and services on the continent, which can help to boost intra-African trade. The free movement of persons in Africa is very difficult and is a need to take into account political will of the head of states for this to become a reality on the continent. Fourth and final, the Pan-African Parliament should advocate and sensitize African countries about the benefits of the AfCFTA and the free movement of persons on the continent and facilitate their ratification and domestication. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I thank you.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. After the speech by this chair, I would like to say that I was present at the extraordinary summit which held in Kigali, Rwanda. There are two things I would like to bring to your knowledge. First of all, the issue relating to the African passport. As the head of the committee said, there will be states, it will have the particularity that there will be a stamp which will enable us to go to all African states and to stay in these African states. So every country will have the duty to issue these passports to its citizens. The second thing I told you this morning when we were at the summit, they said the Pan-African Parliament should be the one that should do everything to ensure that this protocol comes into force. Some countries signed, that's 21 countries, and that is why I agree entirely with the recommendation made by this committee that we should as quickly as possible organize it. Just as we do with all legal instruments of the African Union, we should organize a continental conference where we'll involve ministers of trade, national parliamentarians, and sub-regional parliamentarians to forge ahead with the ratification. Today, I would also like to give you another information. Niger has indeed ratified this agreement, and that means that we have to do it as soon as possible. As soon as possible, we should organize this continental conference to bring our countries to ratify it. And at the same time, we'll include the Malabo Protocol if at the date of 31 December, the speakers of our assemblies have not attained that objective. Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank you for this report, and I just wanted to add these few clarifications. I have a list of speakers before me, and the first is Madu Traore, who is not present, Honorable Ngera, who is not there, Honorable Gento Traore from Guinea. Gento Traore from Guinea. Please, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. Since the elections, this is the first time I'm taking the floor, and I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to congratulate you and all the other members of the Bureau for your elections. Talking about the free movement of goods and services in Africa, it is a lofty initiative which will lead to sustainable development in the continent, because it will promote integration, it will promote economic integration in all the member states as we wish. It will also contribute in reducing the migration of our youth towards Europe, with all the negative things which happen to them when they try to go through the Mediterranean. There's the ECOWAS example which sufficiently proves that it is possible to attain this objective to help most of our people. On this note, I would like to know, Mr. President, what is the timing so that all member states should indeed work towards having passports of the African Union? That is the African Union passport. Thank you. Thank you. Could you kindly tell the people who are in the hall to go and speak somewhere? There are people who are making a lot of noise at the corridor, so there's disorder. Madam, I can tell you that the heads of state made a deadline of 6 months for the agreement to come into force. And if these 6 months are respected, the African passport will not be the African Union passport. It will be known as the African passport, and member states will have to start issuing this passport to their citizens. That is why our role is required, so that this passport should be issued, this agreement should be ratified as quickly as possible by 21 countries, and afterwards they will start issuing the passports. Madam Rumba Wakia from Burkina Faso, Mr. President, it's written Wakia, but it is pronounced Rokia. Worokia. Worokia. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank you, and I would like to thank the chair for his brilliant presentation. I would like to recall here that the free movement in our countries is important. In some countries, from my point of view, I believe that some people are afraid that their countries will be invaded by immigrants. I'll take the example of Morocco. Last year, when I went through Morocco with the African Union passport, I spent about 45 minutes to an hour for my passport to be checked, for my identity to be checked, and I was asked a number of questions before I was allowed to go. So I believe that countries may sign, but they are reticent. And I would also like to add that the lack of coordination at the level of customs and the immigration police lead to a situation where our people around the border areas face a lot of problems. They are poorly treated. So I believe that it doesn't work in our favor. It's not in our honor as African countries which work for the same causes and which have ratified the same protocols, so that we should have open borders to facilitate trade. It is my hope that through the Pan-African Parliament, will be able to influence these different countries to obey the laws, to respect the rules, once these rules are harmonized through our protocol. And on that note, I would like to thank you. Thank you, Madam. Morocco is now one of the countries which have first signed a free trade agreement and for the free movement of goods and services. So once ratified, you will no longer face this problem. So last year, the position of Morocco was not yet finalized, but during the meeting in Rwanda, Morocco indeed signed. And there are some countries which have not yet signed, for instance, South Africa, Nigeria, and some other countries, because they said that they wanted to consult their leaders. But 46 countries have so far signed this agreement in Kigali. And when 21 countries ratify this treaty, we'll start issuing the African passport. So let's just hope that we'll be able to attain the 21 signatures. You know, there's always a problem between the adoption of African Union instruments and the ratification by the member states and the domestication in the internal laws of these countries. So I'll give the floor to Honorable Jean-Baptiste Francouri from Mauritius.
Let me first of all thank our colleague, the Honorable Chairperson of the Committee on Trade, for his presentation. Mr. President, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area has been built as the creation of the biggest free trade area since the foundation of the World Trade Organization. However, the All-Africa Free Trade Deal must be backed with concrete actions by all the African Union member nations who signed this agreement. In addition, each of them will need to speed up their joint preparedness of both their government and private sector, which is crucial to make a fortune of this agreement. Mr. President, the collective commitment has to be, let us give our priority to the African initiative by allowing for free movement of goods and services across the African continent. In order to make the AFCFTA works, there are, in my humble opinion, three important elements, which are, firstly, the political will, secondly, documenting and shaming the bad examples of those not delivering on their commitments, and thirdly, the fact that we all have to be upfront and transparent about arising issues during implementation and accept that we don't have all the solutions. Therefore, Mr. President, it is imperative that all political declarations be matched with concrete actions. So what is at stake and what are the opportunities? The AFCFTA will create a trade bloc of 1.2 billion people with a combined gross domestic product, GDP, of more than $2 trillion. The agreement commits countries to removing tariffs on 90% of goods and to liberalize services. Based on the above opportunities, the benefits from increased intra-trade African under the AFCFTA would therefore create prosperity for every African. Besides, the stakes are enormous, not only Africa, but also for the entire global economy, to which Africa will have the opportunity to contribute an ever greater share in the decades ahead. One of the key local trade advantages and improvements will include the speed up of cross-border trade and tackle beyond the border regulations.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mama. Merci.
Thank you very much for what you've just stated. Indeed, the European Union has got about 500 million consumers, but Africa has got 1 to 2 billion consumers. So if we start consuming what we produce and people are free to move across the continent, that are going to generate a very serious type of revenue. So I think we've got every interest to try and go in that direction, because consumption is the beginning of growth. So you can't develop if your country has got no growth. There are no consumers. Even if one African consumes just $1, with 1 billion will make great progress. Honorable Alima Asamala, she's not there. Bopwe Masa Joel Ngonga from Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. President, again for according me this opportunity to add a word to this important topic on discussion. Allow me, Mr. President, to also thank the chairperson of the Committee on Trade and Customs and Immigration Matters for organizing such an important workshop which brought a lot of these good matters to the table. Mr. President, my intervention will basically be, I think, on one issue. While I support and concur with the conclusions and the recommendations of the report, I just need to raise one important issue which still remains a big drawback on the African continent. And this is to do with the issue of infrastructure, both in terms of the road network, the railway network, the airway network, in order for this trade to be promoted. Giving an example, Mr. President, that if Nigeria, with population of over probably around 90 million or so, even if you just looked at selling to them or rice, which is from an agricultural production, from the Central and Southern Africa, just to get this commodity into Nigeria or West Africa is a mammoth task. In actual fact, this entails that the countries around that area would prefer to even get their agricultural commodities across the Atlantic, because it will be faster and cheaper than getting it from their own brothers within the southern region. And another example would be our neighbors, for me, who come from Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, a huge population, a big demand for agricultural products like grain, even some beef products, which Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi find it very, very difficult to transport and get into this area. And therefore, for us to be able to realize what all our leaders and ourselves are putting forward, we need to invest, and invest hugely in improving the transport infrastructure and the communication infrastructure, not only between our neighboring countries, but across the regions as well. For example, Zambia, where I come from, I think this particular time the government has embarked on investing into a railway network that will cover from the central part of Zambia into the eastern part via Malawi into Mozambique, in order to access the ports that are in Mozambique. And these are the sort of infrastructure that Mr. President would encourage most governments in Africa to embark on, so that even as we talk about trade from South Africa to Cairo, from South Africa into Morocco. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue.
Thank you very much. I think you've gone to the heart of the problem, the issue of communication. Because if you read the first 10 years of the 2063 agenda, you'll actually notice that all this has been borne in mind, including NEPAD. And therefore, there's going to be what you have stated. So look at communication, dry ports between various countries so that people are able to trade easily. You're absolutely spot on. Honorable Saturnino Bouquet Osono from Equatorial Guinea.
Good afternoon to all, Mr. President. I have already congratulated you in private. Now I would like to do it in public, because it's the first time that I am speaking for the congratulations, Mr. President. I also would like to congratulate the President of our Committee of Trade and for the good presentation that he has done about this issue. because I am a member of this committee, I totally agree with all what was said, presented in the report, but I would like also to have one more recommendation, because we are speaking and we have spoken a lot about the free movement of people and goods, but we also speak a little bit, we don't speak too much about security and to guarantee these persons in our cities and in our borders. It's something that it's not good. It's as important, the free movement, but also the security of these persons in our cities. I have an anecdote. When I came here to South Africa, on this same month, on the 2nd, I have a very good image of South Africa. I was very optimistic. But on the 8th, just because of my watch, I was brutally violated in one of these streets of the city, just because I had a Rolex watch. It seems that it's a serious country, it's a serious problem in this city. And as I said, I was brutally assaulted, I was beaten, and I was robbed of everything that I had. And the image that I had of South Africa has vanished. So now, like what happened to me and the rest of the people that happened to me, we prefer to travel in spite of spend the vacations in African cities, spend our cities in Europe because of this guarantee that you can travel freely, you can have everything, a watch and everything, and you won't have any problem in the streets, and you will be back safe and sound. That's why I would like to suggest that the theme of security, we also should have taken into consideration themes of security in our cities and in our borders. Thank you very much.
Merci, chers collègues.
Thank you, honorable colleagues. Well, we can't do everything that you are saying if there is insecurity in our cities. And you are no doubt aware that Africa is tackling the issue of terrorism. We have Boko Haram, we have Seleka, we have all sorts of militia and terrorist groups. And this Seleka from Central Africa, they come and attack a town that is 20 kilometers from our border. They come, attack people, and go back. So this is a serious matter, and I hope that during this conference we'll take a resolution to be submitted to heads of state for the security issues. We really apologize and feel for you in the light of what happened to you, especially that you lost your fantastic watch and a pair of glasses. Truly sorry about that, and let me recognize Dr. Zilekato Diallo from Guinea. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me, in turn, thank the chairperson of the committee who has just made a brilliant presentation, especially on a topic that is very important for us on the CFTA. As stated by those who spoke before me, if we take the case of the Arab Emirates, I think something that is very important to note is that growth has grown exponentially over a very short period of time because of investment incentives and also free movement of people, goods, and everything else. So that reduces costs in terms of what is transported across borders and the movement of goods, and that also improves the growth rate of those countries, as we can see now in countries of ECOWAS, for example, where people are freely able to move. So as MPs, we would like to play our role to exert the requisite pressure so that ratification is done, so that the free trade area becomes a reality across the continent. But for that, I think we need to convince those who are still dragging their feet, because there's a big challenge that we need to take account of. because we can't just not take into account the issue of security and terrorism, and the President has just mentioned it, and we deplore the situation that our colleague has had to go through. But I think it is a challenge, but we need to take it head-on. Cooperation between security forces and customs and immigration. So because once that happens, then populations would be able to cooperate with security forces wherever criminals are or terrorists. I'm sure they will be identified, and they will be then brought before the law and feel the full extent of the might of the law. So let's make sure that this AFCFTA becomes a reality, because we want to increase continental cooperation, as stated by our colleague from Guinea. Probably this is going to help reduce the massive exodus of our youth towards Europe in search for a better life. Today we hear that our youngsters have become victims of all sorts of manner of intimidation and poor treatment, including the fact that the Mediterranean has become a graveyard for our youth. So I think that is going to help Africa know and go through proper development. Thank you very much. Let me give the floor to the chairperson of the Committee of Customs to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I frankly don't see many much questions to answer here. It's just to re-emphasize why we think that this CFTA is important for our continent. Like one of my colleagues just said right now, it is very true since the establishment of the WTO, and now, even in the world, if our continental free trade area is particularized, if it becomes active, we firstly are going to have a lot of benefits. It's going to create jobs for our young people. And people talking about going across the Mediterranean, yes, because there is no job. But if that is actualized, and then in the 6 months period that is mentioned by our heads of states, they are able to have this 22 ratifications. By December of this year, we'll see a lot of improvement because it will help us to create jobs. It will increase our incomes, and the continental value chain, including infrastructure, will start to improve. Because even in the presentation at the workshop, the commissioner mentioned that there is also a vision to have rail link from Cairo straight to Cape Town, from Cape Town to as far as back to West Africa and crisscrossing the continent. So it's important that we as parliamentarians try as much as possible to encourage our national parliaments. That when we return home, our national parliament will see that we've done something in our individual reports to our national parliaments. We should ensure that the issue of the Continental Free Trade Agreement is signed by our country and ratified. As much as we can work on it to domesticate it, it will help our continent. The CFTA, if you see, there were 2 protocols signed, and these 2 are to facilitate trade on this continent. So, as the committee, we actually want to commend the PAP for also forming part of that agreement, and the AU, because this is part of the milestone development we are looking for in Africa. We also like to inform our colleagues here that what was signed in Kigali is just phase 1 of what is supposed to come, because the second phase will take into consideration competition among our people. We'll talk about trading in goods and services and investment on the continent. So people's intellectual property rights will also be captured. And the beautiful thing also about this agreement that was signed is that it has dispute resolution component. that if we don't understand or if we are doubting what is going about on this CFTA, we have the mechanism for settlement of dispute that may emerge. In this case, for those of us that are here, we also want to use the time to actually call on the private sector and the civil society to come on board and support this beautiful trade agreement. It's the biggest so far in the world. Let us support it and see how Africa is going to look in the years to come. Thank you, Mr. President. These are the few things I'd just like to comment on, and you've done much of the talking, so you make my work very easy for me. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, fellow colleagues.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairman. Let me, after what the chairman has said, that Africa's trade is going to grow exponentially because I produce tropical timber, and all the African countries, west and south, east, don't have forests. So for us to be able to sell that timber, there is a third party who takes it to Europe, then re-export it to Africa. He gains 3 times more than he gives me. So if there are roads and I can sell that timber directly to fellow African countries, probably will reduce the cost so that things move much faster. So I think we have to do everything in our power to make sure that this agreement gets implemented and comes into force. So I've seen that the report has got no further comment, so it is adopted. Honorable colleagues, in line with Article 34, I received from the high authorities of Rwanda the invitation to host this meeting in Rwanda in October 2018. A resolution is going to be submitted to the plenary tomorrow so that we can duly answer to this kind invitation from Rwanda. Honorable Clerk, do you have any announcements to make, sir? Honorable colleagues, we've come to the end of our business. So the meeting is adjourned, and we meet again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you. Have a good evening.